WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Tammy Baldwin is the Democratic incumbent candidate for the U.S. Senate. Tammy Baldwin, the election is November 5th. Welcome to WisconsinEye.
It's great to join you.
Thank you for participating in our candidate interview today. I want to start by asking you, why are you running for re-election, and what is your campaign's key message?
Yeah, so I think everybody wants an opportunity at a good paying job, healthcare they can afford, and an opportunity to get ahead. But also right now, people want their rights and freedoms back. We've seen a huge step backwards with regard to reproductive rights, also voting rights and access to the ballot box. And so championing those issues, as I do in the United States Senate, is very important. But it's really clear to me that Wisconsinites deserve somebody who's working for them, not just the wealthy and powerful big corporations. We need, I'm running to stand up for Wisconsinites.
What do you see as the most pressing challenge before the country currently, and what's an example of a specific piece of policy or legislation you would be promoting if you were reelected?
It's always hard to choose the number one, but I think the fact that half of America has fewer rights and freedoms than their mothers and grandmothers is a huge issue, and it's especially burdensome in the state of Wisconsin, where really your freedoms depend upon your zip code. When the Dobbs decision came down, overturning Roe v. Wade, we reverted back to an 1849 criminal abortion ban in the state of Wisconsin. And these months later now, only 3 out of our 72 counties have access to full reproductive care. And that's a crisis for people in other parts of the state. I've heard harrowing stories, and this now in America we see doctors under the threat of prosecution, we see literally women dying. And so it's an urgent need to restore the rights and freedoms that were lost in the Dobbs decision. But it was a hard choice. There's other issues that are confronting Wisconsinites.
Your policy proposal is to bring Roe in?
Yes. So I am actually the lead author of a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act in the Senate. That would make Roe v. Wade the law of the land, so that your rights and freedoms would not be dictated by your zip code or your state of residence, right? And it would take the additional and necessary step of telling states like Wisconsin with its 1849 law, and Texas with its 6-week ban, and Idaho with its criminal prohibitions on traveling out of state for health care, that you can't have these state-level laws that interfere with the rights and freedoms set forth in the Roe v. Wade case.
The economy is the main issue for Wisconsinites. How do you see the state of the economy, and what specific legislation or policy would you promote that would incentivize economic growth, specifically here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so the cost of things is very burdensome for families, and whether that's groceries or gas, rent, childcare, a whole panoply of things. And I have a lot of plans, and so I hope we'll be able to talk about several of these issues. But with regard to groceries, that's something that people see every week, right? And we saw inflation unfold in the time of the pandemic, when the supply chains were all, topsy-turvy. And yet when inflation tempered, we didn't see prices reset. And I think there's a corporate price gouging involved here. During the time that we saw inflation increase by 14%, we saw corporate profits in consumer goods go up by 75%. So I support legislation that would basically put a cop on the beat on behalf of consumers to go after and investigate price gouging when we see it. But in terms of bringing prices down for other things, I have been standing up to the big drug companies, and we have now been negotiating down lower prices. And in a couple of cases, just by standing up to particular sectors of the industry, like the manufacturers of asthma inhalers, earlier this year I was able to bring the price down for many to no more than $35 per month out of pocket. And that was a huge game changer for those who need that medication literally to breathe.
You've brought up inflation. It's stabilized, but we're still well above those pre-pandemic rates.
Yes.
You've talked now about a few policies that you would support. Are there any areas of government spending that you think should be specifically reduced? We are also facing historic deficit.
Absolutely. So, I would certainly go after the big subsidies for big oil, and I would hasten the speed of Medicare negotiation with the big pharmaceutical companies. The first round, which was just 10 drugs, concluded in August. And that first round of negotiation are going to save about 9 million people about $1.5 billion. It's also going to save Medicare and the government money, lengthening the solvency of the Medicare program. This next round of negotiations will be with 15 drugs, and then the year after that, 15 more. I think we can do it much more quickly than that and see those significant changes and reductions in price, both for patients but also for the government, happen much more quickly. And then, I really think we have to go after the tax cheats. People have to pay their fair share. It's pretty likely that in the next session of Congress, there's going to be major tax legislation taken up. And my opponent supports a measure that would add $4 trillion to the deficit and would be largely giveaways to the rich and big corporations. I actually want to lower prices for working families, increasing the child tax credit, making it easier to buy a home with a tax credit for your down payment. I want to help entrepreneurs be able to afford the upfront costs. All tax proposals on the table right now that I think we should be going in the direction of, rather than this $4 trillion tax cut for the wealthy.
You mentioned your support for the child tax credit.
Yes.
It has become increasingly expensive to raise a family. In addition to the child tax credit, are there other proposals that you support that make it easier to raise a family? And also, with regard to the child tax credit, that also adds $1.6 trillion to the deficit. Is that a concern, or how does that get balanced?
Yeah, that was a lot of questions in one. So back to the high cost of raising a kid, one of the best consumer product examples I have of price gouging is diapers. When the supply chains were all screwed up during the pandemic, the price of diapers skyrocketed because the price to make them went up, right? But as soon as we got the supply chains in order, the input costs for diaper manufacturers went down 75%. The price did not budge 1 penny. So I do think we need, as I said, the legislation that I support would empower the Federal Trade Commission to investigate price gouging and take action. Back to the larger picture of the high cost of raising a family. When we had the expanded child tax credit during the pandemic, nearly half of all children in poverty were lifted out. That's an amazing achievement. And I think we need to bring that expanded child tax credit back. It's putting money in the pockets of parents at a time when they are, trying to manage the budget with children. And so I definitely support bringing that back. At the same time, we have to tackle the high cost of childcare. And
do you support subsidies?
There are already subsidies. It's called the Child Care Development Block Grant. And I am supporting a plan to significantly increase that so that more parents have the opportunity to participate, be in the workforce because they can afford their child care. But I do think child care needs larger reforms. I could talk in great detail about some of the plans that we've put forward. But I think we should make sure that both the folks who work in child care settings get the pay they need and the benefits they need to keep with that career. Part of the reason we have such a shortage is because workers in child care are leaving for higher paying jobs. I talked to one child care worker, that's what she wants to do. But she drove by the convenience store every day and saw the advertising, $15 an hour, and she left the career of her dreams to work there because she needed to pay the bills. So we have a lot more reforms in child care that we need to do to make it both affordable to the parents and a livelihood for the workers.
Is there a concern about all of these proposals combined contributing to that ever-growing deficit?
Well, so if you think about child care, it means that people can go back to work, right? If you don't have a safe place for your child, if you don't have child care and you can't afford it, you're out of the workforce. And so it really does generate tax dollars to have more people who want to be involved in the workforce But again, I would support having the wealthy pay their fair share, the exact opposite of this sort of Trump tax cut 2.0 that's on the table right now, that largely goes to benefit the wealthy and the big corporations. I can give you one example that was so shocking to me when it happened. But when the Trump tax cuts first round were passed, in that first year, one corporation got a bigger tax break than all Wisconsinites combined. That was ExxonMobil. All Wisconsinites combined, one taxpayer, ExxonMobil. This idea of doubling down on tax policy like that is very troublesome to me. I oppose that. I want to make sure that if the wealthy pay their fair share, we won't have the deficits that we're looking at.
Let's talk about housing. The cost of housing is another issue for Wisconsinites. What federal policies or legislation do you support that can bring down that cost of housing, either for renters or home buyers?
Yes. So there's a couple, but one of the things that I strongly support is partnerships to expand the availability of affordable housing, which means we got to build more. I've heard, plans to create the appropriate incentives so that we have 3 million new houses across America over a period of years. It reminds me of the investment we made in infrastructure, repairing our roads, our bridges, getting our water utilities getting the lead pipes out. That was a very significant investment. And again, it's local and state partnerships with the federal government. But we're getting the job done. We're fixing the damn roads, as the governor likes to say. Well, we need to have a similar type of investment in affordable housing, workforce housing. But I on the shorter term, there's a number of things that we've seen across Wisconsin, and I'm leading the effort to confront. One of the things we saw after the last housing crisis was private equity firms, not domestic, out of state, buying up huge swaths of urban foreclosed properties, and now folks are subject to sort of out-of-state landlords. These homes are no longer available for purchase.
Is there a federal policy to address that?
Absolutely. These private equity firms get tax breaks, and we should adjust that so that there's not an incentive to gobble up thousands of homes in places like Milwaukee.
Do you support Vice President Harris's proposed $25,000 subsidy for first-time homebuyers?
I do. I think that that is a huge roadblock for many to attain home ownership. And financing always has been. I also support another effort. I'm working with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago to actually get their member banks to taking more first-time home buyers, especially those who are, lacking that savings to make that deposit, but to work with them on, there's training for first-time home buyers that provide a lot of support, make sure that they have a sense of the type of budget they need in order to afford a first home.
I want to ask you about Social Security.
Yes.
Faces potential long-term financing shortfalls. What reforms to Social Security do you support?
Well, it's very simple. Right now, there's an income cap after which you don't pay into Social Security. It's around $169,000 a year. And so somebody, once they make that amount, they don't pay into Social Security beyond that. Well, that means a whole lot of folks are not paying in adequately. If we just lifted that income cap, we would have Social Security solvent for generations to come. It's a very simple fix for Social Security. And, there are people who make millions of dollars a year. They should be paying in on every dollar, not just capped at $169,000.
I want to ask you about health care, which
Yes.
I know is a big part of your legacy. Medical systems facing numerous headwinds in terms of inflation, workforce development, Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates, resulting in fewer services and limited access for people in Wisconsin, including then also the closure of a healthcare system in western Wisconsin.
That's right.
What would you do specifically to preserve access to care and prevent those closures in the future?
Well, this wouldn't prevent it, but I will say that after this HSHS pulled out 2 hospitals, 19 clinics in western Wisconsin, and they did it in a way that caused chaos and havoc, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So I have introduced legislation that would require any health system, looking at these actions, to submit plans to the Department of Health and Human Services, in part so we can track these closures also, but with community input so that there are plans to provide a continuation of care for all the patients they serve. And the workforce, my gosh, they just pull the rug out from under that part of the state, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen in such a clumsy way. So we're focused on that. But in terms of, you mentioned again, a lot of components to this. We lost a lot of folks in the workforce during the pandemic. We have a shortage of doctors, nurses, and many other professionals in the healthcare arena. We need more mental health professionals and behavioral health professionals. And there's a number of barriers right now. One is the high cost of getting those degrees. So I do think we should have very targeted loan forgiveness for folks who go in and pledge to work in hard-hit areas where those workforce shortages are dire. I also, we have a shortage of faculty in our nursing programs. Most of the average age of the faculty is very close to retirement. And really right now that's a bottleneck. There's a lot of folks who want to go into nursing, who want to go into other health professions, but they're excluded because there's not enough teachers. There's not enough professors in that area. And so there's things we can do there. So that's part of the focus on addressing this workforce shortage.
I need to move on. Local communities in Wisconsin are facing a growing number of challenges, from issues related to water quality, PFAS, also an influx of refugees like Wisconsin saw in 2021. What is your plan to collaborate with local governments on issues of this type here in Wisconsin?
Yeah. Well, there's sort of separate issues, immigration and PFAS contamination in the water. On that PFAS contamination, in our infrastructure bill, there's a whole set of measures for PFAS contamination that allows us to partner with localities to test and then filtrate, provide the resources for filtration. And I've been working with communities across this state to do that. And we're making headway on that. And I have legislation to help people who are in private wells test and remediate also. With the issue of immigration, well, first of all, our economy in Wisconsin, especially our dairy economy, relies a lot on immigrant labor. But our visa laws are not well suited for dairy. Oftentimes our visas for farm workers are for planting and harvesting. but dairy cows need to be milked every day throughout the year. So we do need to revise our visas. In terms of communities, Whitewater has seen an influx of a number of legal immigrants, but have talked to my office about some of the things that we could partner on, and that includes having more translation services available to help with both law enforcement, but also with other city services. And so we're working with a city like Whitewater to get new personnel who can assist with that. And we're working with other communities who have reached out to my office, my Senate office, to provide resources to help us succeed with.
You've already talked about taxes, and I just want to, and some of your proposals around taxes, I wonder if you have any more to say about that, but also your position on extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017.
Right. So I remind you that was so lopsided in terms of favoring the wealthy and the big corporations. So much so that in the first year of that 2017 bill, one corporation, ExxonMobil, got a bigger tax break than every Wisconsinite combined. That's just a shocking figure to me. And so I think we need to make working people benefit from the next round of tax legislation. It's pretty clear.
Who is that person when you say working people?
So working individuals, working families, people making, under, in the Biden administration, it's always under 400,000. I want to make it very specifically benefiting those who make a lot less than that, who are trying to get ahead. I want our tax legislation to help people see a pathway to the middle class. And so, whether it's the child tax credit or the child care tax credit, both bolstering both of those. The earned income tax credit, again, benefits working families, earned income tax credit, and then helping make first-time homeownership viable through tax credits. Also, the tax credit for entrepreneurs and startups who put in so much, oftentimes, of their own money to start a business, and that's before they even open their doors and start turning a profit. I think those should be tax deductible, but I do think we have to make the wealthy, the millionaires, pay their fair share.
What is your position on climate change, and what congressional actions do you support that balance environmental and economic concerns with economic growth and job creation?
Yes. So the best example of that was the Inflation Reduction Act, which is creating incredible new incentives for development of solar and wind. At the same time, making sure that, today we produce more energy than we ever have and than any other country. And we need that in order to bring prices down, right? And but the job creation that's happening because of the Inflation Reduction Act, I insisted on Buy America provisions in that bill so that we're not buying overseas wind, overseas solar, but we're actually producing the components here, installing them here, the new jobs that are being created to both manufacture what will be installed for wind and solar, but also the installation jobs are dramatic. And that measure, the Inflation Reduction Act, with its investments in clean and renewable energy, is projected to bring down carbon by 40% by the year 2030. And we're well on our way there. But 40% isn't enough if we're going to tackle climate change.
Do you support more regulation on fossil fuel production?
I support an end to the subsidies for fossil fuel creation because right now they are making money hand over fist. They do not need greater subsidies. In terms of capping emissions, I do think it's really important that we do that. The Inflation Reduction Act, as I mentioned, gets us 40% reduced carbon emissions, but we have to go a lot further than that in order to really tackle climate change.
Should the U.S. continue to provide military support to Ukraine, and for how long and in what form?
So we have made a commitment to Ukraine. I hope it'll be the last round. I supported that wholeheartedly. I really think that Ukraine is about really democracy versus dictatorship. Putin's a dictator, invaded a foreign, sovereign, democratic nation, and the free world stood up to Ukraine's defense. But we don't have boots on the ground there. If we let Putin go roughshod over Ukraine, who's next? Probably a NATO country. And then we would be right in the middle of things. But on your point, how long? I think Ukraine needs to be at a point where they've put Russia in a position where they have to come to the negotiating table. And almost all wars end with a negotiated political settlement. I expect that will happen with this one too.
How should the United States be balancing support for Israel along with concerns for civilian casualties in Gaza?
Well, you know, first of all, I support Israel's right to defend itself. The October 7th attacks, terrorist attacks by Hamas were horrific. 1,200 people killed, hostages taken. But I do believe, and I've been calling for this for months now, there needs to be a ceasefire. There needs to be a ceasefire to allow the hostages to, you know, those that are still alive, to go back to Israel. And there needs to be a ceasefire to surge humanitarian aid into Gaza, where the situation is so dire. There's been the civilian death toll has been horrific.
Has the Biden administration been doing enough?
You know, the Biden administration has brought the parties together on numerous occasions to create, to call for a ceasefire. And whether it's Netanyahu who said no or Hamas that said no, we need to keep on working. And we need to press harder and harder for that ceasefire.
I want to shift a little bit to elections. Are you troubled by the record-breaking amounts of out-of-state money being solicited by campaign operatives to influence our elections here in Wisconsin?
I think we have a campaign finance system that is totally broken after the Supreme Court's decision in the Citizens United case created what are called super PACs. And they probably, in many cases, are spending far more than the candidates are spending themselves, obviously to influence the outcome of elections.
Is that troubling to you?
Absolutely. I'm opposed to the Citizens United decision, but it's very, very hard to reverse because they've said that these are constitutional free speech rights. And they've equated the expenditure of money with free speech, which I find very troubling. We have no disclosure, really, with the super PACs. So the one thing Congress can do is require disclosure. I support that and think we should do that. But I think we have to do more to get this secretive, dark money out of our election systems.
There's been a lot of money spent in this campaign to broadcast and stream very negative ads that kind of walk that slim line between truth and exaggeration, accuracy. How would you respond to a voter who asked you to stop running negative ads?
I stand by what my campaign has run. And it's interesting, my opponent, Eric Hovde, has said a lot of things over the years. And we want to remind voters of some of the things he's said because we think that they'd find it very informative in terms of making their choices about who they're going to vote for. In the case of my opponent, he's had independent fact checkers 19 times find that what he's saying on the airwaves is a lie. And I would call on him in those circumstances to take down ads that are lying.
And you stand by the ads that you have up?
Yes, I'm amplifying what my opponent has said, and if he, maybe he should have thought more carefully about what he was saying before he said it.
The number of Wisconsin school districts going to local referendums is increasing, asking local taxpayers to fund education. Do you think there's a reason for the federal government to increase funding for K-12 education?
You know, I think it's really the responsibility of the state legislature. What I think the federal government needs to do is fund any mandates that it has imposed on school districts. Look, most of education policy is decided at the local school board level. The state is really responsible for what we call equalization dollars, to equalize access to high quality education, between low property value areas and high property value areas. But I would like to see more education paid for by the state income tax rather than people's property tax. The referendums, absolutely. But the federal government has, over time, imposed some mandates. One great example is special education, the Individuals with Disability Education Act.
Some say federal reimbursement for that should increase.
It should, and I very much support that. But the federal role in education is limited. And really, the state legislature needs to step up and fund the schools so that so much doesn't have to be a burden on taxpayer property taxes, which are regressive compared to the income tax.
Another complicated issue, immigration.
Yes.
What would you propose to fix in our immigration system that many see as very broken?
Yes. Well, first of all, the border. And we had crafted a bipartisan border bill earlier this year, very strong, included 1,500 new Border Patrol agents, as well as deploying the technology at our southern border that would allow us to screen almost every vehicle that comes through. We would be able to interdict far more of the poison, fentanyl, that is primarily coming through our ports of entry. Sadly, Republicans, my opponent, Donald Trump, decided that they wanted the issue to run attack ads on rather than the solution. I'm about solutions, and I would get back to work in passing that legislation. But it's also a larger issue. And I would say briefly that I talked earlier about fixing some of the visa programs, but also I believe very strongly that our dreamers, the children who were brought here by others as young children, they've known no other country, they work in our schools, they work in our hospitals, they deserve to have a path to citizenship, and I would definitely support that for our dreamers.
We're down to our final two questions. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the biggest difference between you and your opponent, Mr. Hovde?
Yeah, so I would say both his support of this $4 trillion tax cut that helps wealthy people like himself and big corporations, and how is he going to pay for it? His plan resets spending at levels of the last decade. That would mean cuts to Social Security, cuts to Medicare, cuts to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, cuts to law enforcement support from the federal government. I do not believe that we need to cut working people's, Social Security and Medicare to pay for tax breaks for the rich. And so I would, I want to make sure that people have a path to a great paying job, health care they can afford, high quality, and I want their rights and freedoms back. I'm going to fight for all of those.
Given the nation's steep partisan divide, what do you think is one issue that can be resolved in Congress, in the Senate, in a way that brings people and parties together?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I like to say, the media likes to cover the controversy. Every day when I'm in session, I'm working across the party aisle. I sit on the Appropriations Committee. Half of the members are Democrats, half of the members are Republicans. But every bill that we've reported out has passed on a wide bipartisan basis. We do work together all the time. I think I work with both of the Republicans from Iowa, Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst, on agriculture issues. I work with the two Republicans from Indiana on manufacturing issues, because Indiana and Wisconsin are both manufacturing states. I work with my colleagues across the aisle every day. It doesn't get a lot of notice because I think there's a preferred focus is on the controversy. But we get stuff done. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a huge bipartisan achievement. The CHIPS and Science Act, which brought a technology hub to Wisconsin, was a huge bipartisan endeavor. It happens. It does happen.
Thank you, Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. The election is November 5th. And thank you, U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, for talking with WisconsinEye.
My pleasure.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.